All right, well, welcome to the Oklahoma Weather Show. This is episode number 42, I believe. Here we are, basically the middle of November. Getting a little cold outside. We've had a little bit of snow here in Oklahoma in the last couple of days. One thing I want to talk about, and Brad and I were talking about this morning, about doing a little bit of current event talks. We had the snow. Looking outside my window, the snow is now all gone. But have you all seen the snow that's ongoing up in Buffalo right now? Hey, Brad, you were talking about the snow. John, we'll talk about the snow as well. Have you ever seen that much snow before?
You know, what was a lot of people were comparing the lake effect snow in the west part of New York State, I guess, to an event probably in the 1970s. There was a large blizzard there in the 70s that just crippled the area. What's amazing, though, is how you'll look at south side of Buffalo at the airport, and they had 3 or 4 inches of snow, and then in Lancaster, I think, which is 4 miles away south of the airport, 60 inches was the last tally. So you guys all probably saw that time-lapse video taken of just that snow band that was coming in off the lake, and just that wall of snow. A lot of people were saying, what in the world was that? But it's just amazing how it doesn't move. And unlike anywhere else in the nation, I don't even know. I guess there are a few lakes across the country. Great Salt Lake will produce lake effect snow, but of course the Great Lakes, I don't know where else on Earth where it's quite that dramatic. Maybe somebody else that's watching may be able to chime in on Twitter or Facebook and let us know if they can think about somewhere else. And maybe John knows as well. I know, Mr. Snow, your expertise is obviously small scale, tornadic spin-ups. Later on, I want to talk a little bit about some of the land spout tornadoes too that people often confuse with large tornadoes. There's a lot we can talk about today.
John, have you ever seen that much snow up in Buffalo?
Not in Buffalo. I've heard lots of stories about that part of New York State. If the winds line up just right on the lake, that's how you get these snow bands that just sort of lock into place and consequently just dump snow. You can get the same thing on Lake Michigan when the wind comes out of the north down the length of the lake. Lake and Porter counties in Indiana can get feet of lake effect snow same way.
That's unbelievable. I mean, last I heard, I think I saw 80 inches of snow, and I'm trying to pull up a picture of this person that was flying, getting ready to land in the Buffalo International Airport, and you see the city, and it's clear on one side, and then it is just snowing big time on the other side. Meteorologist Jonathan Condor. Jonathan, we're going to jump into this interview that you helped set up for today in just a second here, but you're from basically the north. I mean, how much snow have you seen?
Well, so I grew up in Minneapolis, and we would take the snowmobile up to the south side of Lake Superior, so Bayfield, Wisconsin, and Hurley, Michigan. And I remember we'd take the sled snowmobiles out, and yeah, you lake effect, and typically earlier in the year, and you would just have a great time. You can find these real areas of really deep snow, so if you get away from the lake or one side, there may not be much. And you might be driving your snowmobile maybe on just kind of very little snowpack and dirt, but then you get into the heavy bits of snow, and Minneapolis averages 55 inches a year, and you get up Hurley, Michigan, and it's in the feet. And I know there's lake effect, up at the UP, Michigan, and there's a ski resort in the UP. They get it, 400 inches of snow. I worked in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and we forecast lake effect. And in our viewing area, or the DMA, we might get all the way down to Fort Wayne, which is 75, 100 miles from the lake. We would get 5 inches of lake effect, but you get up on I-90 near South Bend and Michigan City there around the lake, and yeah, the Lake County, I remember, doing a forecast map. And how do you do that forecast map? Where it's like, okay, this area's going to get nothing, this area's going to get 10 inches, this area's going to get 20 inches. Pretty tight contours.
You know what I thought was interesting too? Guys, obviously the lake effect is enhanced right now because it is mid-fall and the water is warmest as it's going to be. Once they get colder and colder, less evaporation, less condensation. then eventually, with the way the pattern's setting up, that lake will probably freeze over again and shut it off completely. But I was wondering, and John or one of you guys might know as well, is there? It takes a lot of water to produce snow. I don't think a lot of people realize at a ski resort they will drain a lake just to put some snow on the slopes. At what point does this rapid lake effect literally lower the lake level by an inch or two? Is there any research on that you guys might know about where literally the lake level may drop a little bit?
I don't know any. I don't know any at all. John?
Yeah, the lakes are lakes in the sense, but they're really small inland seas with a lot of water, and in the Great Lakes there's a continuous flow of water through the lakes. They're recharging all the time, eventually flowing out through the St. Lawrence River. So they go up and down for a variety of reasons. And yes, if you figure the area of the lake and take 1/10 of an inch off the top to make feet of snow in Buffalo, it's a big lake, a small snow area, deep snow.
Yeah, that's true.
I have a friend of mine. He's a meteorologist up in Buffalo. His name's Todd Santos, and I was asking him, how do you make a map when you're going on the news that's going to show snowfall accumulation? Here in Oklahoma, we'll put on a map and it will say, 1 to 2 inches here and 3 to 4 inches there and 4 inches plus in this spot. But could you imagine for your city just saying, you know what, we're going to see between 4 and 70 inches of snow? If I tried doing that here in Oklahoma, I think people would say, well, sure, you're going to get it right with ranges like that, 4 inches or 70 inches. But I can't imagine. I mean, that's got to be tough. And they basically forecast snowfall accumulation down to the street. This block is going to see 2 inches of snow. This block will see
again too. They have the lake effect snow warnings out for, is it tomorrow and Friday, where the same setup, another blast of cold air. I can't imagine.
I can't either. I mean, they would, that city, I was actually reading the National Weather Service discussion last night, and basically they were saying for anyone that's living on the north side of Buffalo that wants to go to the south side just to observe what it looks like, and they literally said, to be blunt, do not do it. Sometimes you read the discussions and they're very professional, but it's always nice when you see these sentences that just say, to be blunt, do not go south, do not do it, because you're going to quickly encounter roads that you cannot pass. I mean, they're bringing in these huge tractors just to try to make a little inlet to get the snowplows working, but that's a mess. That's a mess. So, well, hey, Jonathan, talking a little bit about snow this morning, but I know you're in charge of bringing Mr. John Snow onto the show today, so this is going to be an interesting topic, talking about forensics and all sorts of things.
Yeah, we're going CSI on today's version of the podcast. When I think of meteorology, I think it's such a refined career field, and I think, wait, I'm in broadcast meteorology, and that's even more refined. And people are probably, well, what other meteorologists are there? There's atmospheric, operational. There's you can forecast for a private firm. You can work doing synoptic meteorology, climatology, or research. Could work for the National Weather Service, and even more refined is forensic meteorology. And Damon and I we have talked about this, and it seems like every once in a while I'll take phone calls in the Weather Center, and people are like, can you tell me on this, well, during last winter, what day there was ice on the sidewalk? And it's like, okay, you got to be a little bit more specific. Or someone will say, well, I need to know about a storm that came through and produced damaging hail, and I was out of town. So can you tell me the exact date? And a lot of times, we'll try to help them. And it's kind of, I think people are trying to do it for like a lawsuit or insurance purposes. And I've actually been approached by lawyers asking, hey, can you work for us? I'm like, sure. And I know, Damon, you've done some forensic meteorology. I want to bring in an expert, and Dr. Snow, to my understanding, you have a strong background in forensic meteorology. I wanted you to talk about that, but I want to get more into maybe some of the stories of some of the cases. I understand maybe you don't want to talk about the specific case, the person, all that, but maybe just the general idea of some cases that you've done that you're a professional witness, and just some of the cases that maybe stuck to you there.
Well, Jonathan, you're exactly right. This is kind of a meteorological detective, and it's probably as sophisticated as the CSI shows try to show some of the modern police tech work. Uh, Essentially, what forensic meteorologists do is try to reconstruct in the best sense possible the meteorological aspects of either a civil case, often a lawsuit, or in some cases even criminal cases where weather could have played a role in a crime. Uh, and of course, we're blessed in the United States by having lots of data available. Now, there's never enough data to map every point, so at some point you also have to use your professional judgment. But we do have good data in the U.S., and in particular, for example, surface data, radar data, satellite data that give us good coverage. Thankfully, the U.S. government archives a lot of this data for us, so it's often a matter of downloading the appropriate data from the National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, perhaps supplementing it with other data sources like our own Oklahoma Mesonet, doing a very detailed analysis, and then also coming up with ways of explaining to a judge or a jury what can be a complicated meteorological situation. That's a big part of the task, is taking complicated meteorological situations, converting them into language or into graphics that you can explain this to a jury, to a judge who often has little or no scientific background. And I've actually found, even trying to discuss with lawyers who, obviously have a good education, trying to make them understand what the weather does and how it does it and how this impacts the particular case.
So one thing I've noticed, John, I've been in a couple situations where I've had to provide some expert analysis. How many cases would you say out there, percentage, are people that are just trying to get rich quick and trying to find a way to basically sue Mother Nature and try to make some money off of it?
Well, it does happen, and again, I can't give any particulars, but I am often contacted by insurance companies who people have filed a claim, and for whatever reason, the insurance company is somewhat suspicious of the claim. For example, people will claim that lightning struck their house and knocked out their TV and caused a fire. It turns out that we do a very good job of mapping lightning strikes to ground in the United States. And so if the insurance company, which will often subscribe to a service, a company that provides lightning strike information, sees something that looks suspicious, like there's no lightning near the area of the claimant, they'll contact a meteorologist to do a forensic study. Were there clouds overhead? Is the lightning strikes that are reported, they're not exact. There's an error in the strike area. Does this fit with a claim, or is it completely spurious? Same thing with hail. I've done more than one analysis for people over the years where people claim their roof was damaged by hail. But when you look at the radar data, when you look at the hail reports, there's no damaging hail within 5 miles. Now, it's not our call as a meteorologist to say that their house was or was not damaged. What you can provide to the insurance company is a statement of what happened meteorologically, and then it's up to the insurance company to respond to the claimant.
John, is it easy in Oklahoma or anywhere in the United States to sue because of what they would, I guess, say are acts of God?
Well, every state has its laws and procedures dealing with civil suits, and it's actually fairly easy to file a civil claim or dispute a claim with an insurance company. How far you get with that depends sometimes on the quality of the lawyer you hire. There are certainly lawyers who specialize in these sorts of claims, and the insurance companies fend them off. Of course, the insurance companies are responsible to their stockholders, and in a competitive environment, they want to keep the cost of their policies as low as they can. So they're strongly motivated to fend off spurious claims.
Do you find yourself working more for a plaintiff or a defendant when it comes to civil weather suits?
In my particular case, I've generally worked with the defendant, usually the insurance company. Sometimes it's a collection of insurance companies. If it's been a big, I've done some wildfires, for example, where people have been suing insurance companies or the pipeline company or the oil company for a wildfire. Sometimes they've sued other farmers for starting the wildfire. But I've usually been on the side of the people defending the lawsuit.
You know, a lot of times here in the news, we report on stories, and let's say like there's a fire. You know, we get these fires that go out of control, and we hear that it's a controlled burn or someone did something. We report the beginning of the story, but we never touch back and look at, you know, well, what happened to the guy who was starting these fires? How long does it take? Let's say a weather system comes in or someone gets sued because of something that's weather related. How long does it usually take from the beginning of that to get that case heard? Are we talking a couple months, or does it take a couple years?
It's usually, again, every state is a little different. Most states will have a specific time limit in which you can file a claim. And so I think this is true of Oklahoma, 2 years. So if you have property damaged by a wildfire and you suspect that someone's negligence caused that wildfire, then you have 2 years to file a claim. Of course, some wildfires are simply acts of God. There's nobody to sue over it. But oftentimes people will go ahead and file a claim against the landowner where the fire started. Again, that's what we have the courts for. But usually you have to do it within about 2 years. And a typical suit will take about a year to settle. So from the time you file a claim, the ones I've been on, about a year, 14 months would be a typical time. If it's a very complex case, then it can go on for quite a while.
A lot of the cases that I end up doing actually, they tend to be about 4 or 5 years later, and sometimes that becomes a little bit of a challenge because now you're really having to dig back and look for data that is 5 years old, and of course every year we're getting new weather instruments coming out. So it seems that the ones I always end up getting are the ones that are too far for me to even remember.
That's true. And sometimes, particularly on larger cases where there's been an attempt to get a settlement, people have tried negotiations and finally get to the lawsuit stage. Those can actually go on for quite some time. Another thing that causes cases to drag on is if there are multiple lawsuits in one event. So if 10 or 15 people are trying to sue at the same time, usually the court will try to put all those together in a package, and of course everybody has to agree. So lawyers go back and forth, and who's going to represent? One can easily make the argument at the end of the day it's the lawyers who probably wind up benefiting more than anybody else. But those can also drag on for some period of time.
So, John, what do you do when somebody is suing Company X? You're representing them as a witness on the defendant, and you look through the data and be like, oh, this person's lawsuit is valid. Clearly, what they're claiming could have easily happened. Does Company X, do they just settle with the person, or does it go to trial? I mean,
that's a decision that the lawyer and the company would have to decide. I think as a meteorologist, as a professional, I'm a certified consulting meteorologist. I'm obligated to tell whoever hired me the best meteorological interpretation of the situation. It's not my call to say that they have a valid lawsuit. that's for the attorneys, for ultimately perhaps the court to decide.
Mm-hmm.
But often, if you'll tell them, you know, they have this position that they're taking is a strong one from a meteorological perspective,
Mm-hmm.
that will cause them to, you know, look towards a settlement rather than actually going to trial.
Dr. Snow, is there a specific case in recent memory that really sticks in your mind, being just an odd weather phenomenon that you're like, when you were asked to do it, you're like, really? Or was there a case that was really hard that you remember that you really had to struggle to find the right data or information?
Probably one of the most difficult ones I've done dealt with a major hail event over a big urban area, and it was not Oklahoma City. We've had some pretty significant hail events there, but this was a big urban city, and it turned out that the hail event actually was a sequence of storms over a period of about 5 hours. And so then the question came, which storm may have produced the observed damage? And that took a lot of puzzling out, and ultimately we wound up looking at police reports. The police were, of course, trying to manage an emergency. They were submitting radio logs and so on, and we were able to actually figure out when 2-inch plus hail swept through a particular neighborhood that day and caused the damage that was indicated. Yeah, that took a lot. That was about a 2-year piece of work actually to get it done.
Wow.
Now, let me point out that even within forensic meteorology, there are specialists. And one of the areas that I don't do, because it is so specialized and it's probably more work than I actually want to undertake at any given time, are reconstruction of aircraft and other transportation accidents. Those are major cases that involve the federal government, because the National Transportation Safety Board is there. They have, particularly if you wind up working for the National Transportation Safety Board, huge investment of time to actually work out what they want at a very high level of detail. You really have to build almost a three-dimensional picture of the atmosphere. I've known people who have produced videos to show exactly what happened to an aircraft, or in some cases other transportation issues like barges piling into bridges in fog. You may remember, some time ago, one of the big bridges in Tampa, St. Petersburg, a barge hit it.
Mm-hmm.
And reconstructing the fraction of the event that was due to the fog turned out to be a very interesting challenge. I wasn't involved in that. I know people who were, because sometimes in these events it's a series of bad judgments at a time of bad weather. And so if the person had made the right judgment, or if the weather hadn't been bad, nothing would have happened. But it's a combination of the two. The transportation people, the Transportation Safety Board, they apportioned this. 10% of the accident was due to pilot error, 25% was due to some mechanic who didn't put a screw in the right place on an aircraft, and 50% was due to it all happening in bad weather, coming together the wrong way. So there are people around. We have a couple of faculty at OU who have done extensive work in transportation testimony, and those can go on for years, because the government is working with the airlines, the passengers or their survivors are suing the airlines. It can just drag on for a long time.
Do you find that in the United States people tend to sue a lot more because of weather-related incidents than in any other country in the world?
I think that's the case. And part of that is the fact that we have a litigious society. People are very free to speak up and seek redress to what they perceive as their grievances. And we have sort of evolved to where that happens through the courts, through lawsuits. Other parts of the world just simply don't do that. Some places in Europe, the UK, for example, has somewhat similar laws. But if you go to, for example, to the Orient, people really don't, unless it's a major corporation. major event sort of thing.
So how long have you been doing this, Dr. Snow? I know when I got to OU, you were still the dean there.
Yeah, I've done this since the early 1980s.
Oh, wow.
Somebody mentioned earlier ice on sidewalks. If you live in the northern climes, the lake effect snow states are a perfect example. Slip and fall cases are bread and butter to a lot of small town lawyers. You know, some person falls outside the American Legion or a grocery store, and they have to break a leg, they go to the hospital, they have ambulance charges. So they wind up suing the grocery store or the American Legion or whatever. And in order to make the case, usually you have to testify when the snow fell, how much it snowed, when it ended, have a requirement to clear their sidewalks within a certain amount of time after snow ends. And if they don't, then they're liable for an accident that occurs. Same with ice, if they put sand out. So a lot of towns, I don't know that we have this in Oklahoma, but in the upper states, there's a lot of laws on the books, case laws in court that set the parameters for if you have snow in front of your house, you're responsible for clearing it away in a certain amount of reasonable time. All that's been determined by the courts. So if you're going to file a lawsuit, you've got to have somebody testify on the amount of snow, when, where, so on.
And of course, the key word there is reasonable amount of time. A couple of cases that I've worked, John, have been on slips and falls. And certainly, you know, I look at the data that day and think, well, there wasn't a whole lot. There may have been a trace of amount of precip, maybe 1/100th of an inch, and it was about 34 degrees. You know, and so I provide the data. You know, sometimes it works out in my favor, sometimes it doesn't, but it seems that there are definitely a lot of those type of cases that come through. A lot.
I worked on a major case where a family was suing a major motor car company, over black ice on a highway, and whether the state had been diligent in getting ice off the highway. They were suing the state. And at that time, I was a faculty member at a state university, so same state. And so I actually had to get permission from the state attorney general to testify against my employer, who was the state of Indiana at that time. Ultimately, that one settled out of court. But there was plenty of blame to go around between the car company, the state, and the people driving the car. Unfortunately, a lot of people died in that particular one.
Yeah, there's always a bunch of people pointing fingers this way, and someone's pointing fingers that way, and someone's saying no, it's over there, and someone's saying no, it's over there. So I can certainly see that. Hey, Jonathan, anything else you want to add?
I'd like to, Dr. Snow, talk more about his AMS certified consulting meteorologist. You know, we're all CBM seal holders through the AMS, and Brad and myself. But what does it take to become a certified consulting meteorologist through the AMS?
It's a challenging certification process that the AMS has run now for about 30 years. It starts out by, first of all, you have to have 5 years of experience. So you can provide references showing you have done consulting work. You then have to take a written exam of about 20 questions in your area. And these are the dreaded word problems that a lot of people don't like, where they give you actually a problem, a meteorological problem, which could be an industrial design problem, it could be a forensic problem, but usually something that is pretty practically oriented. You have to pass that. Assuming you pass that exam, then you have to undergo an oral exam. And that usually will take place at one of the American Meteorological Society meetings. And the typical exam runs 3 to 4 hours. They will have you do an oral presentation as you would to a customer. They'll have you do an interpretation, usually of a radar or satellite image, and then just answer questions. And most people who have been through it rate it, the examination pretty much equivalent to a PhD oral. So a lot of sweat in there. And some people, of course, don't exam well. So it's not meant to be punitive, but to ensure that when you put the word CCM on your business card or on your advertisements, people know that they're getting a very competent, well-experienced meteorologist to do whatever it is they're hiring them to do.
I guess I had one more thing. I saw on your resume that your prior service Army Lieutenant Colonel.
That's right. I was actually one of the last of the Army meteorologist officers. Of course, if you know that through the United States Air Force, who came to the Air Force, the Army for a number of years retained its own meteorologists for research purposes. And so we got lovely jobs like studying chemical warfare problems and so on. But eventually the Army did away with those. Now it's all civilians that do that work for the Army. And I became an operations officer, which I served in for 20 years as sort of a second career. And I was in the 1st Gulf War.
Yeah, good deal.
I remember when I was in the Air National Guard, I was doing air transportation, and the commander of the weather flight, he was like, "You have a degree in meteorology? You need to come over here and be a meteorologist for us." I'm like, "Well, I don't know. My degree is really hard. I'm kind of exhausted. I don't know if I want to go through another 1.5 years of training through the Air Force." And he ran into me all the time, and it was just a flight, but they were always deployed, attached to the Army. And I'm like, my job, tonight I get to spend the night in the hotel room, or do I want to be in the field? Air Force has it pretty well, so obviously I never took that position.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you guys want to plug on here before we wrap it up for lunch? Anything? John, do you want to plug anything before you go off to lunch? Before we wrap this up?
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity. And certainly, if anybody's interested in getting a meteorology degree, come on down to OU. We offer a very good program. And many of our students and graduates these days do, in fact, go into the private sector meteorology. A relatively small fraction go into the federal service. So if you're interested in meteorology, and particularly applied meteorology, what we do at OU really is very good for the program.
John, real quick, I have a question for you. You were dean of OU, of the meteorology program. What is OU's view of local TV meteorology in the Oklahoma City area?
We try to be friends with all of them. Several of them are our graduates, and so we try to maintain good relationships. Of course, Gary England, who is in some respects the dean of Oklahoma City meteorologist, is a graduate of the program, though not in meteorology. He actually has a degree in mathematics from OU, but he took all meteorology courses back before we actually had a degree program. So we try to maintain good relationships because you guys play a very important role in our professional community, and certainly in the outreach to the wider community. You're the face of the meteorological profession.
John, this is such a nice answer. Here's what I envision sometimes. You're watching TV, the professors of OU, and you're like, are you kidding me? Did that person just say that? And you're throwing stuff at the TV. It's like, how could this person be on TV?
We've been really good not saying the word polar vortex, by the way, just to make sure that you guys are very well aware of that.
I have to admit that I've done that.
That's what I thought.
But meteorologists all are very opinionated about their forecasts, and I've seen that actually occur in seminars. Is how can you say that? So it's not the TV meteorologists. We do it to ourselves and to the National Weather Service guys who come out and try to show us why they're doing what they're doing. So.
And a lot of times, if you're making a forecast and it hasn't happened yet, well, then you can still use that, saying, hey, this is what I think is going to happen. It hasn't happened yet because it's down the road. So you don't have any leg to stand on to try to critique my forecast. I can critique yours. It's everyone gets to critique everyone's forecast, right?
And I think that's one of the things that's very good about the program at OU is the fact that we are closely satellited with the National Weather Service office right there in the same building. We have two very strong weather forecasting firms, Weather News International and Weather Decision Technologies right across the street. And all those people work very closely together. A lot of them are OU graduates, so they all know one another. And we have a very good time sometimes ragging people who blow their forecast. I think you have to have a certain sense of humility to be a weather forecaster.
A lot of thick skin. You gotta have a lot of thick skin. Well, hey, we appreciate you coming on today. Anyone else want to add anything before we say goodbye? No, we're all good. All right. Well, hey, it's time for lunch. I'm hungry.
Okay.
Y'all have a good one.
You guys go enjoy your lunch, and I'll talk with you all soon.